But yeah. So I don't know if you kind of like already introduced this to your people. I don't know if you just like hopped in and went live. I don't know.
You know, I just raw dog it. I just throw it on live.
You just go right. Yeah. This is what happens when you're not a streamer, but you do stream your debates, is you just like hop in and you're like, let's go. And it's like, people are like, all right, let's go. This is the content. Like my people expect like some like, how's your weekend going, etc. It's a little bit different dynamic, but yeah, basically what I was saying, I guess for your audience and for my audience, again, I'll reiterate, and maybe you can tell me if you disagree here. It's like, I saw so many libertarians arguing back and forth, like Josie, the redheaded libertarian, classical liberal caucus, all these people arguing back and forth. And like the liberty movement was talking about immigration again. And basically no one knew what the fuck they were talking about. Like it was a whole bunch of people that have no understanding of libertarian theory, that call themselves libertarians, that have big followings with no idea of the positions. We hold opposite positions. I would say that I don't think you'll deny me that my position is a libertarian one, since I essentially have Papa's position. I don't deny you that yours isn't a libertarian one. We just disagree on this, and I want to hash this out. But I was like, we got back and forth a little bit on Twitter, and I was like, dude, like we should debate this. Like we should do this open. And then when somebody sees the classical liberal caucus or somebody else making a dumb argument, be like, no, this is the better version of your argument. Like, look at this, you idiot. And so I thought it'd be fun. And I told my audience, I love debating you because, unlike most of the debates I get, you're actually a challenge. Whereas like most of them is just debating like dumb commies, and not even like, when I say dumb commies, I don't mean dumb because they're commies, though this is often true.
Dumb and commie.
I mean commies, dumb and commie, right? This is like, dude, like you don't even know your fucking theory. Like, why am I doing this? But yeah, like tell me your side. Tell me why you're here, I guess. And also let people know where they can find you. You can find me now on Rumble. I'm talking to Benjamin Boyce on Wednesday, and that's going to be the true test to see whether or not I can make Rumble work. I think we're probably going to move over permanently to Rumble, though, because just like now that I know that you're on YouTube, there are words that I can't say that I can say on Rumble, and it feels fucking great. And so I just want to tell you that, like, it feels good being like, oh, you can't say the naughty word. Oh, okay. So check us out on Rumble, Twitter, YouTube, etc.
Yeah, but basically, yeah, I'm, thank you for having me on. You do this whole introduction thing. I'm not practicing these whole, goodies. But yeah, no, I've
been doing this for 2 years, man. Like you gotta you gotta let the extrovert flow.
But yeah, no, I'm just, I'm on YouTube, Liquid Zulu. I imagine if you look up Liquid Zulu, there's not another one, who knows, there might be. But yeah, I do anarcho-capitalist content on there. I also have a course out on libertarian ethics, I suppose.
Yes.
Yeah. If you're interested in that type of stuff, you can read the whole thing for free. So, I'm not, bullshitting in terms of the content. It's good content. And like, you said something there, which I would absolutely agree with, where like most of these like, big liberty accounts on like sites like Twitter, most of them do not understand the theory at all. And you'll see these people like tweeting out shit like, oh, we've done enough of this theorizing stuff. We need to get to action now. 90% of the people who say that, they have not actually understood the theory at all. Almost every single prominent libertarian has not understood the theory, unless it's like, a Mises Caucus scholar or something. Then obviously they have, but like the liberty
like if Stephen Kinsella were to say that, which he never would, but if he were to say that, I'd be like, all right, cool. Stephen Kinsella says it's time to get some knuckle up and get some praxis done. Like, all right, like I'm a piece of shit. I've been sitting in the basement for too long. Like I will listen to you. I will grab my sword and I will march to Jerusalem with you. And that's not a reference of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. All right. I'm just referencing Jerusalem, My Destiny, a commonly known hymn. Okay.
But yeah, no, so yeah, my position is one of open borders. It is fundamentally an open borders position. I hear like, there's these, stance going around like, oh no, we're libertarians. We're not for open borders. We're for private borders. It's like, well, the open borders position is, I would say, the position which is in favor of private property. Because if you have a state border, the state should relinquish control over that border. The state should not have control over private property. And like fundamentally, the issue I see is this is kind of muddied by like, Hoppians on Twitter who don't actually read Hoppa. But like fundamentally, the issue comes down to what is to be done about public possessions, I call them, or public property, because I don't think it's actually property.
Look,
like,
I think,
yeah,
I think where the real disagreement here is that we don't actually disagree. I think the problem that I have mostly is when you say you're for open borders, what I hear is I'm for accelerationism and the destruction of the country in favor of giving the Democrats as much power of the state and growing the size and scope of the state as much as possible so that hopefully the collapse occurs and we'll get our libertarian paradise. I'm not hearing an actual private borders position, like, because I think open borders is fundamentally cannot be individuated from state policy. And when you say ultimately it's about, well, what do we do with hospitals? What do we do with roads? What do we do with the welfare system? What do we do with all these things? I don't think when you say open borders, you're talking about a state-run policy position. If you put forward a bill to me tomorrow that says the state will no longer control the border and the state will get rid of taxes and the state will get rid of welfare incentives to all immigrants, it's like, all right, cool. Like, that's a libertarian thing that, like, I unequivocally could not justify voting against. But when it's just the border position, but the state is going to maintain welfare, the state is going to maintain, property taxes, the state is going to maintain public institutions and property, and take this category of foreigners and not engage in what Hoppe calls a what is it called? Oh God, I knew it. I think I wrote it down somewhere. You know what I mean? Like where they're not going to pay for things, right? I'll find the exact
forced integration,
trustee or whatever. No, it's not forced integration. It's he calls it a full cost principle, right? The full cost principle, where like we're subsidizing the immigration, et cetera. Like the main problem I see is that like open borders sounds nice, but it only sounds nice because you're individuating it and you're not treating it like a state policy of how they handle property violations, how they handle enforcement, how they handle its citizenry and its tax structure. Instead, you're just saying people should be able to move freely. And I disagree. Like, there is no right of immigration. There is a right of private property owners and the right of self-determination, et cetera. All the things that flow from bodily autonomy.
Well, I would say, fundamentally, if there isn't a right to immigrate to some location, that implies that somebody else has a right to exclude you from that location, which implies that somebody has a property right in that location. Because fundamentally, for sure, a right of exclusion is a property right, right? But like this, if I just like pick some random road in Minnesota and I live in New Hampshire, right? I'm not aggressing against any individual taxpayer by going from New Hampshire to that road in Minnesota, because no individual taxpayer owns that road in Minnesota. It has to fundamentally be treated as unowned property.
It's stolen property. It's stolen property. The road in Minnesota that the state manages is stolen property that they hold in trust, and we must expect them, to the best of their capabilities, until we can restore private property rights, to engage in behavior that is going towards the restoration of private property rights and protecting that private property as they would a trustee of the property that they have stolen. So yeah, it's stolen property, and the state is a trustee of that property until such a time that they can return private property rights to the citizen.
Well, one great way to return private property rights in these public possessions would be to allow homesteading of them. Let the homeless guy go into 100%. A park and homestead it, right? That's fundamentally like not the restricted immigration stance. The restricted immigration stance is, no, you're actually aggressing against, people in Minnesota if you're moving from New Hampshire to Minnesota. They don't say this, but like fundamentally, domestic migration, there is no principal difference between that and international migration, right? And neither per se.
There's a huge difference. No, it's. I think it's silly to say that there's no fundamental distinction. The state created a distinction, right? If all property is privatized, right, there is no immigration issue. If you have total privatization of property, immigration is not a right, because immigration has never been a right, but it's also a non-thing. It is the state that creates a system of governance that it holds over people, right? And then designates some people foreigners and some people citizens. But because the state does this, right? Domestic migration is obviously fundamentally different than foreign migration, because domestic migration involves people that are already citizens, that are already paying taxes, that are already voting, that are already a part of whatever, to whatever extent the government creates in some capacity culture via its doctrines and its authoritarian nature. It creates this distinction, right? And I think it's really important too that we don't individuate immigration from trade policy, right? Because there is this problem that we do not have free trade. And so there is, because the state is imposing trade restrictions on goods to and from other nation states, this changes the incentive structure along with welfare, along with public property, along with taxes, along with all of these things that individuals that are citizens are paying, that forces in, well, I won't say forces in, but incentivizes people, unlike goods that can move across borders willingly, to come into said stolen property and violate people's private property rights.
Well, I would say, you gave some differences there between, international and domestic migration. But like if it came down to, domestic involves, you're a citizen, but I would say a citizen is a status category. But like one thing you did bring up there was that while these citizens are taxpayers, well, would it be a crime for a tax evader from New Hampshire to go across to Minnesota? Right? Is tax evasion suddenly?
Obviously, it wouldn't be a crime in the way that we use it from a natural law perspective. But I'm also, talking to the non-libertarians here, it would legally be a crime as far as the U.S. government is concerned. But no, it would be no crime to be a tax evader and to move from one place to another. I get what you're saying is like, well, the problem is that, you have to pay taxes. I'm not saying you should pay taxes. I'm not saying it's morally right to pay taxes. And I'm not even saying that you really actually have to pay taxes. I'm just saying if you don't, you do so under the threat of coercion, right? And so the individual that is a taxpayer is obviously being coerced by the state into that status, as is the foreigner. Everyone here is living under some level of oppression, and I think both you and I would agree that the level of oppression is kind of a consequentialist category that we're less concerned with than the idea that it is indeed coerced and it is authoritarian. It is a violation of natural law. But nevertheless, that changes things, right? Because the foreigner is subject to a different experience in forms of taxation, right? An H-1B1 visa person coming in is not paying the same taxes as the other chemical engineer at the plant whose job he replaced. He's privileged in our tax structure against individuals that live here by the arbitrary category of citizenship that the state gives to one, and at least in this term, precludes from the foreigner and the businesses that import those workers as a means of keeping the American citizen out of the job market. Like, it literally created the problem that it then blames the immigrant for when the state was involved in it all to begin with.
Well, I would say, the tax evader is also privileged at the expense of, in relation to his non-tax evading brethren. And, children receive all sorts of subsidies, right? Children get all sorts of free shit, right? But that doesn't mean that children are suddenly, criminal invaders when they move from place to place over public possessions, right? But what I'm trying to get down at... Of course
it doesn't, but that wouldn't be my argument.
Right, yeah, that's what I'm trying to get down at. Like, what is the relevant difference between a foreigner and a citizen with respect to migration? Like, what is the single thing which maybe there's a list of things which makes domestic migration categorically different from international migration?
Okay, so, and for ease of sake, we'll go with the idea of maybe not using states. Maybe using a single country, because I think you want to use the states in the U.S., but the problem is that different states have different laws, right? So, I mean, domestic migration in the states is a little bit different than, let's say, domestic migration where you're from, because different municipalities might have different tax structures and stuff, but they don't have an entirely different criminal code.
Yeah, sure. Right? So you move from one city in Iceland to another, or from outside of Iceland to inside of Iceland, or just, something. What is the fundamental difference?
Okay, so the question is what is the fundamental difference from, let's say, someone from Ecuador coming across the United States border into the United States versus an American citizen moving from one state to another, assuming that the criminal laws and everything are essentially the same, just possibly an arbitrary border and like maybe tax structure difference.
Yeah.
So the difference there, as I stated previously, is that the state has designated one a citizen and one a foreigner. The state has arbitrarily, by the existence of the state, it has said these are our borders and these are our citizens, right? And everyone's life, every company, every many facets of the economy are all based upon that arbitrary distinction. I agree with you that ultimately it is arbitrary, but you also must agree, like we would also both agree that there is no system of private borders in this country. And that's what we're trying to get to, right? Self-determination and the right of private property. There are no private borders in the United States of America, just like there are no borders in private borders basically anywhere in the world, except for maybe like some weird tribe somewhere or something I don't know about, right? So once the state makes this arbitrary distinction and treats these two totally separate, right? And they grow up in such a way, and these individuals are in states that are also doing the same, right? So they're in Ecuador, and Ecuador considers them a citizen, and Ecuador, they've grown up in that culture under that economy and under those things. And we add a layer of non-free trade policies, right? Where the natural migration economically is not able to occur. And then the state designates these separate people differently based off of its own tax structure, based off of its welfare system, based off of who pays into these systems, right? That the fundamental distinction becomes the arbitrary distinction. I recognize that the difference between a citizen and a foreigner is arbitrary. But the problem is that if you want open borders, right? Open borders, which is, I take issue with the term, but if you want the free migration of people into and out of the country, right, then we must abolish all distinctions that are arbitrary from the state between the citizen and the foreigner. And this requires total abolishing of the state, because if the state has no system of citizenship and it has no, then one could simply leave on tax day into Mexico and not be a citizen and come back. Like the entire system of the state is dependent upon this arbitrary distinction that they make. And I'm all for, if you're saying I want to open borders, what you're really saying is I support the complete dissolution of the state and President Joe Biden, getting on the podium and saying, today we have dissolved the United States of America, good luck, and hops on a chopper like Nixon and flies away. I'm all for that, but that's not really what we mean when we say open borders. What we mean is we maintain the current status quo, except we allow as much immigration in as we want. And this is forced integration in a violation of private property rights. And further, and it's a collapsitarian position. It's a strategy of accelerationism, not an actual libertarian position, as far as I see it.
So you said one thing there, which was basically you said.
Sorry if I rant a lot. I'll try and shut up.
I take notes so I can come back to different points. You said that open borders requires abolishing these arbitrary distinctions between citizen and foreigner. Well, I'd say one great way of doing that is to have it where, it doesn't matter whether you're a citizen or a foreigner, whether you can go into the US or not, right? It's completely irrelevant. That is one way that is going to go towards achieving this goal of removing this distinction between citizen and foreigner, right? So opening the borders goes towards that goal. Why is it?
So that's where I would quote Hopper, right? Crises, as everyone vaguely familiar with history would know, are typically used and often purposefully fabricated by states in order to further increase their own power. And surely the crisis produced by a free immigration policy would be an extraordinary one, right? Like you're saying, well, it goes towards this, but I don't see how it goes towards that at all. All it's saying is, the state is going to allow everybody in, but we're going to maintain all of these systems. It's a policy position of what it does with the people it holds power over. And I think both from a crisis standpoint, that it's not one that will actually lead to libertarianism, but also from several, not even looking at the collapsing position, it's a system used by left-wing politicians as a means to gain power, to gain additional state funding, to steal more taxes from its citizens to pay for these individuals, to get them counted on the citizen so that they can have larger representation in the House of Representatives, right? And to import labor and things like that, which is like, businesses should be able to import labor. Like, like I'm less concerned with the right wing kind of like problem with that, but it is privileged labor because of the arbitrary distinctions that still remain between the citizen and the foreigner. To get rid of the idea of the citizen and the foreigner, to destroy the idea of American citizenship is to destroy the state, which I'm all for, right? But I'm not necessarily a collapsitarian. Like, what I want is a position that moves us closer to private borders and private property rights so that we can actually see the libertarian future that we want.
Yeah, I'll just note real quick, like, you bring up this point that it's a leftist talking point to have this open borders thing. But I mean, I watched this Bernie Sanders interview earlier, and he said that open borders is a Koch brothers, talking about, right?
Well, he's completely reversed that, right? Like, I mean,
it seems like Bernie Sanders hates it, right? Bernie Sanders hates open borders, right?
Well, now he loves it.
Does he?
Now he loves it, right? Like,
when did he say this?
Like, I mean, I can't pull him up immediately, but he has completely renounced that in the last presidential primary debates. He was called out for saying that, and then he backpedaled as best as he could during the debate because he didn't want to stand by the position. I don't know if it's because he's a lying sack of shit, also known as a politician, and that he really does actually hate it because he hates the Koch brothers or whatever. So I mean, it's difficult to know what a politician actually believes in general, but I have seen him since then recant those statements.
Well, I'll just take your word for that.
I would say other than that. I promise you, I'm not bullshitting on this one. He has backpedaled those statements.
I would believe that Bernie Sanders has backpedaled on various things. He has no principles.
Or any politician, right?
But another point you brought up was that these immigrants are privileged labor. And, that's some necessary distinction. Well, I would say, given the, Civil Rights Act, blacks in the US are privileged labor, right? But that doesn't imply that there's any different set of rights considerations when it comes to blacks as opposed to whites, right?
This is two wrongs don't make a right. Two wrongs don't make a right. The Civil Rights Act is privileged labor. The lack of, and that's a major contention with the idea of forced integration, is that private property owners, including businesses, are unable to be able to discriminate against people for those specific categories, right? They are denied a right to discriminate against immigrants if they feel that they do not want immigrants working in their facility, et cetera, right? So an open borders position, along with a state-based system of welfare, along with free trade that incentivizes migration, along with public property that can be utilized and free. I mean, I think it's Hoppe that said that, like, living on the streets in Switzerland is better than like many places in any country, right? All of these incentives that are arbitrary and forced by the state, right, means that I, as a private property owner, a businessman, right, if I'm found to be intentionally excluding immigrants, then I'm in violation of the law, whilst the state is intentionally importing and integrating these people into my community, forcing me to hire people that I don't want to hire and to change my community, which includes my own private property, in such a way that I have no choice over. The open borders position is as equally authoritarian as a completely closed border.
It'd be like, this argument strikes me as like, well, if, let's imagine there was a law where if somebody comes out as gay, you have to, if they want to marry you, you have to marry them, right? And the state will force this marriage onto you, right? That doesn't imply that that we should then start imposing restrictions on people coming out of the closet and being gay, right? They should be allowed to come out as gay, right? It's a separate crime to then force these people onto you, right? It's a separate crime to force immigrants onto you and force you to associate with them.
It's disanalogous, and I'll tell you why it's disanalogous. The law, one law already says, we would have to assume that the law already exists, that all gay people must be forcibly married to other people, right? And then they say, well, let's say a law in the state of Virginia, right? And then Virginia says, well, we're going to give taxpayer money to gay people to move from, Santa Monica, right? Like if you live in Santa Monica and you're super gay and you're out and you're gay and you're openly gay, we're going to give you $1,000 a month universal basic income. And then I come in, and then I come in and say, hey man, we already, and there's already an existing law that says only 10 gay people from Santa Monica can move to Virginia, right? And then you're coming in and saying, well, that law is authoritarian. We have to let as many gay people that want UBI, that'll be forcibly married to people, to come in as they want. And I'm saying, dude, fuck off. Like, we need to move towards freedom, not towards exacerbating one by saying, by picking and individuating the thing. The system as a whole is a problem. And so we need to move towards freedom. And so moving towards freedom would be not paying UBI to gay people to move here, and would be to get rid of the law that says that gay people need to be forcibly married, not we need to focus on bringing in more gay people so that we can have UBI stolen from us and be forcibly married.
Well, I'd say this kind of highlights why, it seems to me like, seeing immigration as a crime is it's like this notion of a crime against society. If it's truly criminal, it has to be criminal against some specific person or specific people. It's let's just imagine I'm some Martian and I land down in the middle of, rural Utah, in just the middle of nowhere. Nobody has any property nearby. Who am I specifically aggressing against by doing this?
Right. So the idea being that the immigrant is not an aggressor, because the immigrant, using the public hospital, using the roads, using all of these things, is not aggressing upon an individual taxpayer. It was the taxpayer that was aggressed upon by the state by building those things to begin with. So like the immigrant has no provable aggression in this matter, right? And so we cannot call the immigrant the aggressor. And I agree. What you're doing is you're labeling, you're layering multiple levels of state aggression by incentivizing further state aggression by opening up the borders, because the problem itself is the existence of the state, the taxes, the public resources, etc. Like, it is the state that is the aggressor here, not the immigrant that just wants to come in somewhere. Like, the immigrant that wants to migrate to Texas to get a better job is no fucking aggressor, right? But the state aggresses upon the citizen again by denying them the right to be able to exclude them from their property, by saying you have to hire these people if they apply and they're qualified, right? They have to be an equal opportunity employer, is what they'll put, like EOE in America. Like, it'll be like, you must be an equal opportunity employer, right? It is the state that says, well, we brought in all these extra immigrants, so we're going to need more money for taxes, right? It's the state that in the system of the state, that the open borders is a state policy. It is not. It is a policy of a strategic plan to get closer to private borders, private property rights, right? Because without the state, there is no open border policy, and there is no closed border policy, and there is no immigration. There is simply private property owners and covenant communities that have voluntarily associated, and whatever rules they impose upon individuals coming and purchasing and utilizing their private property.
Well, I'd say, just right off the bat, to respond to that last point you made, you said that open borders is a state policy, but fundamentally it's not a state policy. It is actually the lack of state enforcement of a certain aspect of their possession of various public assets, right? And you also agreed that the immigrant is not an aggressor, but given he's
not... No, it's not. That's silly. That's a silly position.
Of course
saying
it is.
Open borders
That's what it means.
Is not the No, it isn't. You're individuating it, and you're not looking at what
it has to be.
No, it literally isn't, because they have categorized people as citizens and people as foreigners. Open borders is just a end limit to the amount of foreigners that they allow in. It still places them under the tax structure. It still places them under welfare. It still places them under the distinctions of what private and public property. There's still all of these other laws and things are attached to their status as an immigrant. If you mean by open borders, right, that there will be no border patrol agents, that no one will ever be checked at the border, that we let criminals in, we let everybody else in, right? You also must mean we must abolish social security numbers and social security cards in order for it to be truly open borders. Because it's not open borders if the state is able to designate one person a foreigner and one a citizen. We must destroy any designation between the two in any forms of taxation. And we also, because of that, if we do maintain social security cards, right, then we must get rid of any designation between the two in terms of voting. So China could bring in 1 million people right before an election day and vote in any election that they want, right? We must also, what you're talking about is abolishing the state. Open borders in the way that you describe it. Yeah, it's based in a collapsitarian position if you like authoritarian dictatorships, but it's not. Like what you're talking, when you say open borders is a policy, you individuate it at the border, but what it actually means in order to institute that policy in any meaningful way means I'm for abolishing the state. Well, congratulations, I am too. But like, how do you get there? And the tactic that you get there is through collapsitarianism and just collapse the economy and also no one's ever going to put that forward or ever actually vote on that. What they'll do is call something that isn't what you're calling open borders. And what that is an increase in influx and migration into blue states and pulling in taxpayer funded money so that they can have access to cheaper privileged labor and so that they can have more representation in Congress. Like it's a policy position. If you're talking about the way you're talking about, you're just saying abolish the state. Cool, abolish the state. No one's ever going to fucking vote for that, and that's not what a politician's ever meant when they said that they're for open borders.
Whether anybody votes for it isn't really relevant to what's correct, right? But fundamentally, this is why I brought it up earlier, where open borders, the fundamental, at least in the libertarian circles, the correct circles, it comes down to the question of public property, public possessions. What is to be done by those? Because everyone agrees that it's a trespass if I was just knock down your front door and run in there, right? Everyone agrees with that, right? But
I would just add it's public property and government restrictions on private property's rights to exclude.
I think that's a completely separate issue, and basically, all open borders does, at least given, if we just take the word open borders, you open the borders. Basically, what the state does is it will no longer restrict immigration. It is a free immigration status. What this means is not that it's suddenly okay for people to trespass on your actual tangible property. What this means is the state will no longer be excluding anybody from accessing certain public possessions, right?
That's a lie.
But that's what it means to have open borders.
I'm sorry, it's not true.
That's what open borders means.
That's not what that means.
You open the borders. Okay. You have free immigration.
Okay.
This is fundamentally what it means.
If you open the border, and this is why you tried to separate the two, you sneaky snake, okay? You sneaky man, all right? No step on sneaky snake. But listen, that's why you tried to separate the fact that the state has infringements on private property in terms of the designation of citizens and non-citizens, right? So if you open the borders, it absolutely means that individuals' private property rights as concerned with businesses that they have. If I own a shopping mall, right? I can't open a shopping mall tomorrow, right? I mean, obviously I don't have enough money, but if I open a shopping mall that says no Mexicans, right? Then the state will find me out of existence and forcibly seize my property.
Yeah, that's bad.
And so if the state has open borders, right, it absolutely means that you have an influx of forced integration. People are not allowed to restrict their private property from the people that the state are allowing onto their private property. It is forced integration by the state of individuals that is a violation of private property rights. It is an increase in violent private property rights, even if we don't take a consequential analysis around the idea of the potential tax revenue, right? Because I mean, there are libertarians that make the bad, I think, economic argument that open borders would just increase GDP and transactions to such a degree that the taxes burden would not have to increase. I think that's silly.
Well, I would say, if you cut taxes, then you're going to get more inflation. You're going to get more fiduciary media introduced by the Fed, right? But that doesn't mean that tax cuts are bad, right? Tax cuts, the state will react to those tax cuts by aggressing against some people more, right? But that doesn't mean the tax cut is bad. You have to, you have to analyze these things.
So you could actually get increased tax revenue from reducing taxes.
Sure, but for whatever reason, right? If you reduce the taxes, then you can get more. The state can compensate by getting more inflation. Like if you just if the Supreme Court tomorrow decided that taxation was theft and there would be no more taxation, you'd probably get a lot more aggression against some people, namely people who hold US dollars in reserve, right? These people, they'd be inflated out of existence. Yeah, for sure. That doesn't mean that making taxation theft across the US is bad, right?
No. Well, you're separating you're separating a consequential analysis of like future ball outcomes, right? And whether or not those would create consequences versus a policy decision that necessarily dictates increased private property rights violations. Open borders is a policy decision by the government on the amount of individuals that it wants to include in forced integration into communities and the amount of individuals that it will allow to hamper on other individuals' private property rights. Like they are necessary components. You must get rid of, for just this one specific argument, you must abolish all laws that disallow and all fines that disallow individuals from discriminating in terms of the sale of their property, the renting of their property, and the entrance onto property for malls and things like that, movie theaters, etc. You must abolish the Civil Rights Act, and you must go further and abolish everything that came after that and say that it is perfectly legal to say no Mexicans allowed, no El Salvadorians allowed, no Germans allowed, whatever you're thinking, no whites allowed, right? Whatever it is. If those laws remain intact, it is definitionally a policy that is designed specifically to create increased private property rights violations against people because they lack the freedom to be able to disassociate.
Well, the intentions of this open borders policy, if Joe Biden implemented it or whatever, it might be to infringe on property rights more. That might be his intention, right? Just as my intention with passing gun rights legislation might be because I want to get my hands on guns so I can shoot people, right? But the intentions aren't really relevant. What matters is how specifically does this actual implemented policy, who specifically is it aggressing against? Right, so you said that open borders necessitates property invasion. Who does it necessitate property invasion against, and how?
Well, no. See, this is another problem that I have with your analysis. Is that when you say I'm looking, you're basically saying I'm not going to look at this from a consequential perspective because that's not where I derive my ethics and my morals from. Right? I want to know who is the aggressor. Right. So, and if there is no aggressor in this situation, then you have no justification. Other than your own personal moral preferences to say that one ought not do this thing, right? Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, basically you could have some morality outside of law, but as far as this debate is concerned, it's a legal debate. If there is no aggression, there is no crime, right? There's no conflict at all.
The state, right? So the state is the aggressor here. I think I want to reiterate this point, right? Is that the state is the aggressor, both in closed borders and in open borders policy. Both of these are acts of aggression that necessitate additional aggression, or in some areas and less aggression in other areas, right? Like it is simply a change of aggression, right? It is just changing it. That is why I do a consequentialist analysis, because the state is the aggressor, both in an open borders policy position and in a closed border policy position. And so I say, how do I get rid of the state as an aggressor, right? And instead of taking a collapsitarian view, right, I very much align with Hoppe, which is that we should get closer to a private borders situation, strengthening private property rights and doing so as well with our immigration until such a time that the state can give up its power and we can have full privatization of private property. The state is the aggressor in both situations.
Okay, right. We can actually I can save this question for later because this ties back into something earlier. Given that the immigrant himself is not the aggressor, the state is the aggressor. On what how could it possibly be justified to stop this immigrant from doing his immigration? It's not justified, right?
It's also not justified to allow him in.
Oh no,
this is the paradox
it couldn't be this.
They're both unjustified.
That's a contradiction.
It's not a contradiction.
It is. It's not justified.
Both of them entail aggression,
and it's not justified to do not A. Right? This is a contradiction.
No, it's only a contradiction because you're setting up a false dichotomy. There are places where it's not a contradiction, which is the abolishing of the state. Right? Only under the abolishing of the state is the third option here.
Either this immigrant is allowed in or he's not. We can label he's allowed in as A, and he's not allowed in
is the aggressor
as the negation
in both
of A.
situations.
Right, but either is going to be that he's allowed in or he's not allowed in. Is it just for A or the negation of A?
It's a false dichotomy. It's a false dichotomy
What's
because
the
there's a third option, which
is
the state dissolves.
That would mean he's allowed in.
If the state dissolves, then there is no aggression.
That would fall under him being allowed in.
Okay, yes, if the state dissolves.
Right, but under him either he is allowed in or he's not allowed in. Those are the only two options. It's only under him being allowed in where you don't have to
accept your false dichotomy, right? Like I said, that it's a false dichotomy because what you're saying is he's allowed in or he's not allowed in, and both of them, right, is assuming the maintenance of the state.
No. I don't assume the maintenance of the state.
He's allowed in, right, under the presumption that the state is dissolved.
No. I don't presume that at all.
If the state exists, right, assuming the state exists under both situations, right? And then I'll do it with the state not existing, right? If the state doesn't exist, right, then there's no justification to stop him from coming in, right? Because there's no existence of a state. But no one has a right of immigration, so every private property owner can exclude him if they for whatever reason. I mean, the default would actually be exclusion unless they had some sign up that said, people are welcome in, right? And then they would presumably vet them in some capacity to come onto their private property based upon their choosing, or they won't, right? So there's no right of immigration. The right of immigration does not exist, right? What there is a right to is to move onto people's private property if they're willing to allow that person to move onto their private property.
There's also a right to move on to public possessions because the state doesn't own those possessions. So the state does not have a right to exclude you from those possessions, right? This is a fundamental point. Who has the right?
Stolen property that the state is in trust of.
Okay, who has the right to exclude this immigrant from coming onto this road in Minnesota? Who has that right?
Well, presumably every piece of private property there, but let's assume they can get there only using public property means, right? Like they can ride only on public highways and they never cross any private property.
Right now, let's just assume it's it's a Martian who wants to land down in a public park. It was constructed by the state and everything. They want to land down in this public park in the middle of Minnesota. Who has the right to exclude this Martian from landing on that public park?
So who has the right to exclude the Martian from coming in? I don't know why we're using a Martian, because it just fundamentally changes everything.
Removes any sort of what other property did he cross over or anything? He just lands down from the sky, right? We just have to deal with this individual bit of property.
I'm not going to engage with the Martian thing because I haven't thought enough about first contact with alien species and how we should.
Or maybe I
that,
just have a helicopter and I fly over, right? Just something. I just go into this public park. Who has the right to exclude me from this public park?
Right. So the public park is stolen property. First and foremost, do you agree that a public park is stolen property?
I mean, certain resources were definitely stolen in its creation, right? But fundamentally, until such time that somebody says, no, actually, I built all of this and I was defrauded by the state,
someone built a fucking road with taxpayer money that was stolen. Mm-hmm. Right? You said we're going to get right. I guess this is why you want to use a Martian analogy, because he's going to have to travel on stolen property all over. And you want to talk about a magical area that's not being maintained. Even if it's a public park, The state claims ownership over it. The state is illegitimate, right? It is an unjustified entity that has barred entry in the public park from other people, and they use stolen money to maintain the property. There's like parks and recreations and all these other things, right? Mm-hmm. It is stolen property. Now,
okay,
under most circumstances, this stolen property has a real owner, correct?
Yes, but often it's impossible to determine this owner, which is what I was getting at. Right, it might be the case.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's impossible. We're worried about the objective truth here. There is a private property owner, and that private property owner has a right to exclude people.
The objective truth depends on whether you can identify who owns a given resource at any given time. Right, property rights are conflict-avoiding norms, so you have to be able to avoid conflicts over these public possessions, just like everything else. Right, so given our current level of understanding, we have no clue.
Right. So we have no clue. Right. So we have no clue. Right. The taxpayers whose money have been stolen, right, are the individuals that have the most legitimate claim to the property.
All of them,
as of its existence, not the state.
All of them together.
Well, I mean, you can't have collective ownership of property.
I agree.
It's stolen property. We're in a bit of a paradox here, right? It's stolen property.
You could say a contradiction.
Who has the right? Right. Well, who has the right to exclude it? Your answer is because it's stolen property, no one has a right. It's all common property. It all reverts, despite the fact that money has been stolen. Contractors, right, that have built things on said land have probably the most legitimate claim. So in terms of a road, the company that built the road that the immigrant is using is the actual private property owner here, because they're the ones that homesteaded. Now, they need to pay restitution for the taxpayer money that was given to them. You know what I mean? Like, so maybe you could make an argument that they don't necessarily own the road until they pay said restitution, right? Until anyone comes to demand said restitution, they would have a pretty legitimate claim as a sole owner. But nevertheless, you have property, right, that is stolen from multiple people. And so they all have some level of input until a private property owner can be established, or until someone homesteads said property.
Right. Somebody can homestead it. Like, I don't know, an immigrant or something could come in and homestead this public possession for the purpose of maybe standing there whilst they await to go somewhere else, right? Or a homeless bum, right? This is the homeless question, right? This is why it fundamentally comes down to what is to be known about public possessions, right? Does the homeless bum have a right to stay in that park, or does Dave Smith have a right to exclude him? I say Dave Smith does not have a right to exclude him. Dave Smith didn't homestead that park, right? If there's an actual legitimate homesteader, the construction company said, no, we built all of this. We realized we were defrauded by the state, and those were actually taxed funds. Those were actually stolen funds, and we want to come back and reclaim this park that we built. Then fine, yeah, kick the bum off, right? But if that's not happening,
so if we're gonna treat public property as common property, right?
It's not common property. It's not. I want common property. I want to be clear.
No, fuck you.
It's not.
No, it is.
It's not common property. It's unowned. Right? It has to be treated specifically as land.
It is common property.
It's not common property. Common property is a contradiction.
It is not a contradiction. So you just.
It is.
All right. So no, it is not a contradiction because you have multiple people
that
are utilizing property. It is not a contradiction.
I can explain this. Right?
No. It's fucking common property. You have multiple people. Their funds are being stolen. They're utilizing said property and are excluded by the state from being able to homestead said property because the state claims that it is their property or that it's property for everyone's use. It is common property. If some immigrant wants to come in and homestead a piece of property that has been funded by the state taxpayers, then they must treat it as common property and either maintain easement rights as that existed under those individuals before, or buy them out.
I can explain why group property implies contradiction, if you want. Basically, we can imagine a group of people, A through Z. We assume that they each commonly own some stick, right? What happens if A wants to use a stick to spearfish, but B wants to use a stick not for spearfishing? He does not want the stick used in this way. Well, either we select A to be the winner of this conflict, or we select B. There is no third option, right? If we select A to be the winner, then B did not own the stick. If we select B to be the winner, then A did not own the stick. Both options contradict the presumption that everybody in this set owned that stick, right? This is why group property implies a contradiction.
No, you're wrong. You're wrong, because what you're doing, right, is you're saying a stick. I'm not claiming that a stick is common property. The common property aspect is that it is divisible, right? So this is why Hoppe in his work, common public private property and the rationalization for the total privatization of property, argues, I think, with an example of a well, I believe, right? It's been a while since I've read it, but I believe he uses well. Right? Everyone in the village, there is a well that everyone in the village uses and they gain water, right? It is better for a private property owner to come and improve the conditions of the well so that more water can be made, and then he homesteads the well. But in doing so, he must also recognize that there was a common property usage of the individuals before that were all collectively utilizing the water that is divisible. The well is not divisible. He is an owner of the well. The water that is gained and constantly replenished from the well is divisible, and that water easement rights must be maintained, or people need to be bought out once he utilizes that property. It's the same thing with, let's say, a game trail that like people are using to get to and from the river, right? It's in many ways you might even utilize this logic towards the Blockian proviso, but I don't really want to get into that because I need to read it again. Right, but this right of easement, etc., it is divisible, just like the public park. Right, the public park is a section of land, and those those land belongs to all of the taxpayers. So if it is $1,000, right, worth of it's $1 million worth of land, right, then of the 330 million American citizens, presumably who have paid taxes into this, right? Let's say it's 300, right? Have paid taxes that have in some way gone to this park, right? The park need be sold, and then all of those people are owed that restitution for that, right? And it is those individuals that also have common property rights to their local fucking park that they walk to, that they play their dog at, that they have these easement rights to, and have had money forcibly stolen from them in order to maintain property. You return that property or the value of that property to those people before some random homeless Mexican can fucking homestead it and just go, this is mine now.
This is fundamentally misunderstanding the point of the contradiction I painted. Basically, fundamentally, whether something is divisible or not is entirely subjective. Whether a stick is divisible into individual units, that's entirely subjective based on what I want to use the stick for. Maybe I want a really long stick, or maybe I don't care how long the stick is, right? So whether it's divisible is subjective. Maybe I want an entire well's worth of water, or I just want a little bit of water. But fundamentally, we have to be able to avoid conflicts, right? So fundamentally, if there's a property right in something, there can be conflicts over its use, right? It can be used in one way or an alternative way, right? And if you have a collective property right where both A and B own this thing, right, they're both set to own it, right? And A wants to use it for A's purpose, park itself, B wants to use it for B's purpose.
I want a park.
And they're incompatible.
No. Right? Yeah, I'm following you. The park is a scarce resource, right? Mm-hmm. And dividing up like little square inches of the park like changes what the park is, right? We could look at the park as one entity just as much as we could look at the land. And to say that it is like divisible is like problematic in that scenario. Just as the same way as, Robin and Crusoe want to use a stick one wants to build a raft and one wants to use a fishing pole because one wants to get off the island, and one is, saying, well, we're stuck here, we need to fish, and then you break it in half. Neither can use it for either a fishing pole or a raft. So it hasn't actually solved the problem. I'm sympathetic towards that, right? The problem becomes, well, it's like, well, if land is not divisible, right? And we say, well, it's not divisible because the park is an entity, right? Well, then what about, you could take that to its other extreme, right? And say that all state-owned, right, which is stolen land, all state-owned land is one entity. And you can't give any of that land to anybody ever, and you can't pay restitution for any of that land because you can't determine the value because it's subjective, whatever, et cetera. But all of the land in existence, all of the state parks, like I think it's something like 96% of Alaska, for example, right? We cannot give a mine right? We cannot give a mine to the people who have been mining gold in the area in Alaska as we dissolve the state as restitution for the crimes of stealing, land from them that they used. We must give out only 96% of Alaska, and like we can't divide it because well, where does the gold mine end? Where does the gold mine begin? Is all of Alaska one big gold oil mine? And like, even though they don't necessarily connect, I could consider Alaska simply a gold mine. And like, you're getting into a situation where land literally can't be returned.
No, I wasn't meaning to imply by that you can't divide things in praxeology, but it has to be divided by relevant praxeologic units. So you could divide the stick that I'm using as opposed to other sticks, because I'm using this stick.
Currency.
That's
commodities in exchange for the land, right? Like
there
paying people back.
There are ways to
common property rights to the land.
There are ways to divide these things up, but it's not. You can't divide it up as a collective property right. You can't say that everyone owns this stick equally and we divide it up, right? Because what does that mean, right? I want to use a stick to spearfish. You want to use that stick for not spearfishing. How do we divide that up, right? We're gonna make two sticks out of this somehow, right? Because they can't both happen.
No. Robin and Crusoe both want to use the same stick. It is the perfect stick, right? But it's not just a stick for fishing, and it's not just a stick for rafting, right? In fact, what it actually is it's a stick that they use both for fishing. They both use it for fishing, just like a public park. They both use it as a public park. They both take turns fishing with the stick, right? One of them owns the stick. One of them doesn't own the stick. Then John comes in, and John says, fuck you, you're both my slaves, and it's my stick, but I'll allow you to use the stick. And then Robin and Crusoe, 72 generations later, finally get the stick returned to their descendants. Except we don't actually know who owns the stick, as you said. There is an objective reality, but we're not able to ascertain the objective reality as to who owns the stick, right? And so we're in a situation where we have one piece of property that objectively goes to one owner. We're unable to determine who that owner is. Now, the two individuals that have been enslaved and have been using the stick have more of a right to this under some designation of abandonment or common property, etc., than the random Mexican immigrant that says, well, it's a free stick now, motherfucker, my stick.
This does not resolve the contradiction.
Robin and Crusoe's descendants for the stolen situation, not give homesteading rights and then just say, well, it's up in the air, because people have been fucked over in this scenario and people have utilized this property together and communally, and those rights need to be maintained.
Sure. So either Robin or Crusoe could look at this and go like, hey, no, I have the chain of this stick, right? Whatever. Right? That's fine. But fundamentally, this does not resolve the contradiction. The contradiction is based upon, right, we assume that this collective owns this stick. We assume this. We assume that both A and B own something. Then what happens when A and B disagree about how to use that thing? You cannot resolve conflicts when you have collective property rights. It's complete anathema to the theory. It's impossible to resolve conflicts within the group.
It's obviously not, man. Like to suggest that Hoppe is anathema to libertarianism is silly, right? Like, what would, like, come on.
Maybe he just didn't consider this, right?
Issue,
if he said this, then maybe he just didn't consider this counter thesis, right?
The problem is that you're saying, what I'm saying is the land is stolen land. We cannot determine the original owner, and the state is a crime of all crimes, right? It is the primo facto crime doer, right? So the state must take all of its stolen property, right, that it has, and to the best of its ability, pay restitution to individuals. Not just say, well, since we have this stolen property that we hold in trust from the people that we're stolen it from, we can just give it to any random passerby. You do not give property to some random passerby.
They're not giving it to anybody.
Pay restitution for it.
They are not giving it to anybody. This is not the open border stance. It's not give it to some random Mexican. It's the state no longer enforces its claim over this public possession. That is the open border stance. And fundamentally, you've not addressed The contradiction I've raised.
No, the state has a responsibility as a criminal to not further increase its crimes
That is
by
not further
returning
increasing
that property via restitution. Yes,
it's
it
not
is.
further increasing for them to hold their hand back and say, right, we're done with this situation. That's not further criminality.
You're individuating the entire open border stance as a policy issue that directly necessitates all of the other
just
private
call me an
property
individualist
crimes.
then.
And then in the end, well, no, it's not an individual. That's not the same thing as an individualist. You're individuating, right? If I go to Lowe's, right, and I buy a hammer at Lowe's, and I go to the counter and I say, I have purchased a hammer. Thank you. Hunky dory. That's what you go to Lowe's for. You buy a hammer. But if I go to the fucking counter with a hammer and a tarp and some lye and some 5150 cord and some duct tape and like a big machete and a couple other things, and then like and I get like 6 different types of hammers, and then the cashier looks over and sees a wanted poster that looks a lot like me and it says the Hammerhead Killer, and he looks over at me and my eyes are really far apart. All of a sudden that hammer fucking matters. It's a piece of evidence in a larger equation that is connected to all of these other things. You can't individuate one state policy when it's inexorably linked to other state policies that require violations of private property rights.
It's not inexorably linked. And this is what I'm trying to explain with this contradiction, because it is not that the case that the taxpayers as a whole own these public possessions or anything like that, right? There is nobody who's being invaded by me going to some public possession. Nobody's being invaded by that, whether I'm a foreigner or a domestic person, right?
Yes,
Nobody's being invaded
You're
against.
an invader.
Who am I invading
I'm being
against?
invaded.
How?
Any private property owner that does not have the right to exclude you.
If you don't have the right to exclude me, then you don't own it, right? Because we agreed earlier that exclusion is the same thing as property, right? If you own something, you have the right to exclude people from that thing. It's the same. It means the same thing. I own my body because I have the right to exclude you from using my body. That's what it means to own something.
Yeah, I agree. The state has stolen private property rights from individuals. Like, surprise.
Okay,
that's my argument.
So they should throw their hands up, and they should.
The two are linked.
And
the
they should,
state's theft of your private property rights combined with forced integration is a problem.
So they should stop excluding people from these things they don't own, because that's acting as if they do own it. Right? They should stop doing this. They should stop acting as if they own these things. Right? But fundamentally, you don't have the right to exclude me from some random road in Minnesota, because you don't own that road. Right? So who am I invading by going there? Like if I just went to New Hampshire tomorrow, who am I invading by going on those public roads?
So we're going to ignore the private property distinctions. We're specifically going to talk about public property, right? Who has a claim to public property, right? The state has an illegitimate claim to public property, right? And all of their policies thus affect the inclusion and exclusion of who is on public property, right? It's the state coppers that say, homeless guy, you're not allowed to be in this park, because we want a nice clean park. Right. And the homeless guy can be like, well, fuck you. I want to be in this park. But the state says no. And this is wrong. Or it might be right, depending on your perspective. Right. Like that's always a big debate within libertarianism as well. When you get into the heady stuff. Right. So the problem here, right, is that the state holds in trust this stolen property for its citizens that they are stealing, that they have stolen the property from. Both the original historical owner and those whose commodity, their funds, their livelihood, the taxes on their property, right, that they are taking to maintain said property. So when attempting to ascertain who has the legitimate private property right to exclusion, right, it would be the first person who homesteaded the property and then had that property stolen, and then the descendants of that person, right? So if we're in northern Georgia, for example, it would be the Cherokee Nation before they were forced to walk the Trail of Tears, right? It would be somebody in there that has a right to that property because they actually built houses and like engaged in commerce, set up a post office, and were doing everything they could to like align with Western values and ideas of like property and borders, et cetera, and homesteading. Right. So in the inability to determine who that person is, how ought we, either as a government or as an individual, right, reduce conflict? Your answer, it appears, is that the reduction of conflict, the best way to reduce conflict is that the state ought simply abandon, right?
Yeah.
Off like laissez-faire, and then just whatever happens. My argument is that they hold it in trust until they can pay restitution and they can restore, right, the property to its original owner to the best of its ability.
They can
and
do that
by maintaining, well, you don't know that per se, but
they're irrational. They would never do this, right? They are having an irrational possession.
Dog, you don't get to have your cake. You don't get to have your cake and eat it too. Where I'm saying all of these other things come with open borders, and then you're like, no. Like the irrationality in the voting doesn't matter, and now all of a sudden, like you don't get to have it both ways.
Because I'm individuating these things, as you so love to say, but that's fundamentally how legal analysis is done, right? There is nobody who is being invaded by this immigrant. This immigrant is not invading against anybody, and you agreed with this, right? So therefore,
the immigrant is being invaded. The immigrant is invading.
Who's he invading?
Every private property owner that
they
does
have a
not have
collective
the right to
property
exclude them.
Do they have a collective property right? Then he's not invading against them.
What in the fuck are you talking about? I own a movie theater. Right? I own a movie theater. Okay? I put up a sign that says no Mexicans.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? The government comes in and says, you're not allowed to do that. That's illegal. Okay? Your movie theater no longer belongs to you. We're going to destroy your movie theater, and then we're going to use this money to help fund bringing in more Mexicans. The Mexicans are invaders unwittingly, right? I'm not saying that like it's not their fucking fault.
No, it's the state who's the invader there.
The state is the aggressor. Right.
The state is the invader, right? That's who's the invader. So you can have you'd be justified in excluding the state from your property. But you'd not be justified in
excluding Mexicans.
Why? From not your property?
Because I don't want them.
From not your property? From something which isn't your property?
No, from my property. You keep
going
back to public property as well. Like,
do you own the public roads?
I own the movie theater. I own a movie theater. I say no Mexicans, and then the government stops me.
You're allowed to exclude Mexicans from your movie theater, but are you allowed to exclude them from things you don't own? The public roads. Are you allowed to exclude them from there?
Individually allowed to exclude them from what I'm saying. I individually am not allowed to exclude them from public roads.
Who is? Who has that right?
So the state also doesn't have that right.
Okay,
here's the thing, though. Okay, listen. Here's the thing. At least some portion of the divisible public park is my property. It is owed to me as the taxpayer. So I have. At least I don't know how we're going to, we have to work out how we're going to divide it, right? But I am the person that is being stolen from in order to maintain this property. And I am the person that utilizes this property when I walk my dog to the dog park. Okay. I have utilized this property. I have some historical link to this property. It may not be as strong of a historical link as if, let's say, I had gone there and built a house on it, but legally I'm not allowed to as far as the U.S. government is concerned. And my money is being stolen from me. The state has no right to give up its holding of the public park to individuals that are not owners of the public park. It is a further crime to step away from the public park and just say it's a free-for-all because that public park is owed to me, the taxpayer, that you have stolen from in order to grab that stolen property and in order to maintain that property. You don't have a right to give up that property because it belongs to me, motherfucker. You stole from me, so you better sell it to somebody and give me the money you owe me, you thief. They don't get to just go, well, we're going to say laissez-faire now, and then let some other, I don't know, like fucking Chinese company or something come in and buy up the property or homestead the property because they're just out of it now. Like they stole from me. They are the criminals. They need to pay restitution first. Otherwise, they're creating an additional crime.
No. The additional crime is in them continuing to exclude people from that which they don't own. This is called forestalling in law, right? When you're excluding people, you're acting like you own something which you don't actually own. Right? This is a crime. It's an ongoing crime. They should stop doing this crime, right? And nobody has this property, right? Right? Assuming that, maybe there are some public possessions where you can say, no, I actually built that, so I actually own it. Assuming that isn't the case, right? If it's some public possession where nobody's asserting any sort of property right over it or anything, then nobody has the right to exclude this immigrant from going there.
The state,
therefore, the immigrant does not require invitation.
The contradiction. The state has created and attempted to justify the contradiction of public property.
Okay.
By stealing property that is owned by somebody, right? Using stolen money to maintain the property, using stolen money to hire contractors to make improvements to the property, right? They have created the contradiction when they stole the property and when they stole from other people in order to maintain it, right? Now, to simply say, you know, like if I go to your house, right, while you're away on vacation, and I take all of your things out of the house and I throw them on the street and I slap a fresh coat of paint on it, and you're gone for 3 months because you're on vacation in Thailand, and then all of a sudden COVID restrictions hit, right? And like you couldn't come back to the UK. They wouldn't let you come back, right? And you're just having fun in Thai boy with all the lady boys that you want, right? You're living it up. You have not a care in the world. Everything's good. You're doing your YouTube channel there, but you own a house and you want to come back to your house. I stole your house. Now, it is my responsibility as the criminal who stole your house to return your house to you. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
To the best of my ability, the best way to restore private property rights is for me, the individual, to give you your house back. Right? Now, if I then go, well, I made an oopsie, I had a real bad drug problem, right? And I was thinking about selling your house, etc. But like, I'm clean now. I got into rehab a month later, and I'm good to go. I realized that I did a problem, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the doors unlocked, and I'm going to put a sign on that says anybody can have this house now, right? Like free house for anyone who wants it. And then I leave, right? And then your house gets further damaged and somebody moves into your house. I have made additional crimes beyond the theft of your house while you were gone by not doing my best to maintain your property that I have stolen, right? To clean up whatever mess I made and attempt to give it to you in its best order. The same is true for the public park and whomever the state stole the park from and whomever else they stole from in order to maintain the park.
This is fundamentally disanalogous to the case of public possessions, right? Because in the case of my house, it's known exactly whose house it is. It's clear and distinct who owns this house, right? But that is not clear and distinct in the case of public possessions. It's just all this money gets mixed in together, and, we have to have some way to wrestle this away from the state. And, some heroic homeless people, they go out and they wrestle these parks away from the state. And then, people get mad at them.
People, I love that line.
They're heroic. That is what they are, right?
Fucking real heroes. I love it. Continue.
Yeah, that's what they're doing. They are taking it under private control, private direction. That is what we want, right? If they're taking it from some specific person, right, then yeah, that's awful. Give it back to that actual person who owns it. But if that's unidentifiable, it's under our theory completely unowned, right? Nobody has the right to exclude anybody from it.
But nobody forestalled.
The state did.
Or sorry, forestalled, not abandoned. I meant to say abandoned. Nobody abandoned the property. Right? There is an objective private property owner that it was stolen from. And then there's other property that was stolen. If it's objective, it has to be ascertainable.
If it's objective, it has to be ascertainable. You have to be able to perceive this property right somehow.
Just because we lose evidence doesn't mean that we can't know via logic that someone was an owner. Just because we lose evidence. If you lose the deed to your house while you're in Thailand, and I don't know, fucking Fight Club happens and the building that has your bank records gets destroyed, right? Like, it doesn't mean that it's unascertainable, right?
Right.
And therefore,
the burden is on me.
And that's what it means as an observer. Yeah, it's like as an observer, but we know logically that this house was owned by someone, that there is an objective owner. We can know that someone owns it, just not necessarily who owns it. We can't prove that you're the owner, but we can prove that there was an owner of this house that was sold to somebody.
But fundamentally, the point of law is to avoid conflicts, right? If it's completely impossible to discern who the owner of it is of a given thing, then in all respects, it's not owned, right? Because it's impossible to avoid conflicts over its use.
this state, but we know that it's stolen property, and we know property was stolen in order to maintain property. So what the state needs to do in order to pay for its crimes and resolve conflict to the best of its ability is not laissez-faire and let people homestead. The right answer is to sell that property at market price to the best of their ability and redistribute whatever funds they get proportionally to the taxpayers whose money was stolen. The state needs to pay restitution. Why are you saying that once people commit crimes, they need not pay restitution if we can't determine the original,
I'm saying they should stop committing the crime of forestalling. They should stop committing the crime of preventing people from entering New Hampshire. They should stop doing that.
The state created the paradox. They're in a position, right, where they're in possession of stolen property. If they do the laissez-faire situation, like you're saying, you're right. They're no longer forestalling people from property, but here's the other thing, right? The other problem is that this is the individuation that is an issue, is that the state also holds a monopoly on power and violence. So any person that may be a legitimate owner of said property is incapable of being able to protect their property now. So the state, who has stolen the right for you to defend your property, has also now made it where anybody can destroy your property, and they're not taking what they have stolen and getting money for it so that they can pay restitution.
Yeah, that's horrible, right? That's bad. I don't like that they do that, right? But that doesn't imply that this immigrant is aggressing against anybody by going there. And given he's not aggressing against anybody by going,
why do you keep? Did you prepare against an invisible opponent? I've never once said that the immigrant is the aggressor.
Given he's not
putting that position on me.
Given he's not aggressing against anybody by going there, nobody has the right to stop him from going there. Right? This is the fundamental point. Right? Given he is not aggressing against anybody by going there, nobody has the right to stop him. Therefore, open the borders.
Plenty of people have the right to stop him.
He's not aggressing against anybody, though. Who's he aggressing against?
Stolen property.
Who's he aggressing against?
He's aggressing against.
Oh, so you think he is aggressing against people?
Yeah. I'm cool with that. This is the first time I've said it.
You got mad at me by suggesting that you might have thought this, right?
Well, only in the position where he goes in and homesteads stolen property from other people, right? Then he is an aggressor. The state, because the state stops being an aggressor in one area, continues being an aggressor in other areas to allow him to become the aggressor in this situation where once he comes in and homesteads it.
It's not per se an aggression, right?
The immigrant was an aggressor by utilizing public roads to move to a town and rent property, right? But if he's homesteading property that property belongs to someone, we don't know who that property belongs to, right? But that property must be liquidated in order to pay restitution via the state. The state is holding that property in trust until it can return that property to its rightful property owner, or until it can liquidate that property and pay restitution for the crimes that it has committed against the taxpayer.
Right, but fundamentally, if there is nobody bringing this guy to court, there's nobody who he is tangibly, and particularly aggressing against. It's just he's probably aggressing against someone.
Liquid Zulu. If an immigrant moves to my fucking park and the state says he can build a house there now and I no longer have a park, you better be goddamn right I'm taking somebody to fucking court to the best of my ability, assuming that I can, assuming that I have the funds to do so.
Did you own that court, though? Did you own that?
I've paid for that park.
Do you own it?
Park. I am an owner of some divisible portion of that park.
So you're a collective owner.
Liquidate that park and pay it to it. I'm not a fucking collective owner. It's divisible.
Okay, so then you don't have a right to exclude him. If you don't own it, then you don't have a right to exclude him. Yes, I do. Exclusion means ownership. If you have the right to exclude, then you have ownership of it. That's what it means to own something. Right? These are the same thing.
So, again, the stick is not divisible. I understand that. 96% of Alaska is divisible.
Well, fundamentally, whether it's divisible
of Alaska
is subjective. It's based upon praxeologic concerns.
It's not subjective.
it is
subjective. It's not subjective that it is divisible.
It's whether or not it's based upon action, right? It's based upon men's individual ends. That is a subjective consideration, right? That's what I mean by it, right? Whether or not you can divide a stick depends on what men want to do with that stick, which is subjective in the economic sense.
Okay. So you're saying it's not impossible to divide land, though, right? You're saying that where you divide the land is an arbitrary kind of like subjective preference about like what land it is that you want specifically. And somewhere one person might want a whole park, one person might only want the dog park portion of the park. Like, yeah, I'll bite that bullet and that's fine. And so you're saying, well, if it is subjective and each individual's, value in terms of understanding what portion of the park they own, because they own some portion. Every taxpayer owns some portion of that park. They do. It is the state that has created this contradiction. You're saying, well, they can't own the park because you can't collectively own property, right? But the state is the one that is stolen from the taxpayer and pulled it together into one area of property that needs to be resolved. They created the conflict here, and it is the state's duty to not further increase those conflicts. If I want a reduction in conflict, the state need take all of the stolen property that it has and redistribute it to the best of its ability so that we can have restoration, right? Restoration of the idea of individual private property rights. It is not my fault, right? It's not my fault that the state has pooled my resources into this presumed collective ownership, and that because this exists, that is the situation.
Let's say I steal your money. I steal $1,000 of your money, and I use it to buy a single pineapple. Do you own the single pineapple or the $1,000?
I own $1,000.
Okay.
Well, I mean, technically, I don't have anything in my possession, but I mean, like the amorphous $1,000 that's changing value, et cetera, et cetera. That's what was stolen from me, and whatever value I place on that via voluntary interactions before that we set up is what needs to be paid in double, right? So I can now, I'm owed 1,000, and he's stopped from arguing that I don't take another further 1,000, theoretically.
Right. But when the state takes your tax money and they use it to pay contractors to build public parks and stuff, you don't then own those public parks. You own the money that they stole, right?
Right.
The contractors presumably own the materials used to make those parks.
Right, you're right.
You don't own them.
Now let's go through this analogy. No, I'm going to go through your analogy, and I'm going to show you exactly what the fucking problem is here. All right? You come and you steal $10,000 from me. Oh my God, Casimir, shut the fuck up. I'm about to mute you from spamming. Like, stop freaking out. So, I own $10,000, right? You come and you steal $10,000 from me. You then utilize that $10,000 to own a pineapple, right? And you're saying, well, he can do whatever he wants with the pineapple, right? Because what he really owes you is $10,000. Wrong. He does not get to let go of the pineapple. I get to fucking kidnap his ass, and I get to take his Kia Sorento that he owns, and I get to sell his fucking Kia Sorento so I can get my $20,000 because he owes me $10,000 for he stole, and he owes me the other $10,000 for restoration. The state similarly does not get to allow other people to then come in and homestead the pineapple, right? Like, you stole from me. You don't own shit, motherfucker. And you don't get to abandon anything that you own because you owe me first. Before you can give up on anything that you hold in your possession, you better fucking give it to me first because you stole 10 grand from me. I don't care about the pineapple situation. I'm owed whatever money I can get from you. And if you own property, fuck you, that property's mine.
Fundamentally, if I, purchased, quote unquote, a pineapple with $10,000 of your stolen funds, right? That was a null and void contract. So the guy who sold me the pineapple actually still owns that pineapple. So, I should relinquish control over that pineapple so that the other guy can come get it back, right? That is correct, right? You don't get the pineapple and the money you were stolen from, right? You don't get both of them. Right, that's okay. Double
so
counting.
In the situation, so he purchased a pineapple in a voluntary transaction, but the money, the commodity, which like let's use let's say it might be better to say he traded a TV for a pineapple, right? So we don't get people confused with like currency, right? Because some people have difficulty recognizing it as like a commodity, an owned thing, right? So let's say you stole my TV and you traded it for a pineapple, right? You're saying that he doesn't have a right to the pineapple because the pineapple the TV was stolen, right? So the person that has the stolen TV, to the best of his ability, need to try and give the TV all the way back, right? So in the analogy of the park, to the best of the state's ability, they need to give the park back to the original owner. But we can't determine who the original owner is. Since we can't determine who the original owner is, your answer is, instead of restoration to the victims, we just leave the TV on the street that you stole in exchange for, and because it's not owned. Like, no, you give the TV back, you give everything back to the best of your ability.
The state is not the guy who sold a pineapple in exchange for a TV. The state is the guy who stole the pineapple and bought a TV with it. Right? So this is the fundamental difference.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. But he stole the TV and bought a pineapple with it. Right. And then, so what you're saying is the pineapple needs to be returned, right? To the original private property owner.
Yeah. He's going to get his pineapple back.
Because he defrauded.
The person who had his TV stolen, he doesn't get the pineapple and the TV, right? That isn't owed to him, right? You aren't owed the park and your tax funds back. You're not owed both of these things because one of them has to go back to the other guy. Right.
Right. But what you're saying is that the assets, right, of stolen property cannot be returned to an individual because we can't determine who the individual is. Right. And so what we will do then is we will simply allow anybody to have the stolen assets.
Well, it's better for
the state doesn't have enough money to pay for its crimes. So, whatever. Everything's done.
It's better for a homesteader. The homesteader has the greater claim than some random taxpayer. That's the fundamental point. The homesteader has the greater claim than some random person who had their TV stolen.
No, he doesn't.
He does.
Because he shouldn't be allowed, he should be forestalled from fucking homesteading that property.
So who owns it then?
Is in trust of that property until it can be returned to its rightful owners. Or liquidated to pay for restitution for all of the other stuff. If you can determine who the original private property owner is, then the park needs to go to that original private property owner, period. Right? If you're unable to determine who the original private property owner is, and you hold this stolen property, right, and you've stolen from other people, then you need to give up whatever it is that you have. You're incapable of determining who owns the TV and who owns the pineapple. You have no idea who owns these things.
So it's essentially unowned. You're incapable. It's incapable.
You're in possession of stolen property.
You can't determine the proper owner of this. You can't determine who the property lies with. You do know it doesn't lie with the state. You know that much, right? But you don't know who it does lie with. So therefore, it's essentially unowned, right? So anybody can come along and homestead it, apart from the state, of course, because they have like a negative claim on it, essentially.
Okay, so in this situation, we're talking about, I'm trying to wrap this all into like a something that makes sense. We're talking about the idea of immigration, whether or not the state has the right to exclude people from coming into public property, right? You've kind of already just kind of shifted completely away from the idea that forced integration on private property. Like, you just shift away from it every time. Because it's right that
what is the forced integration
necessitates
then? Right,
I've explained it to you a bunch of times, right?
It's the same point.
Property owner.
Who is being forced to integrate against whom? Who is the invasion against?
We've gone through that one in circles, right? Which is the private property owner is disallowed.
It's the same point.
Discrimination. It's from discrimination. They're not allowed on their own private property, right? And by having a public policy where you maintain the status quo, but you allow in more of this aggression, and necessitates a further increase in aggression. But the invasion of the public property, right? Who can possibly invade public property when the public property is stolen property, and you say the stolen property belongs to no one? You say that it no longer belongs to anyone if we cannot ascertain who it is that this property belongs to. I fundamentally disagree with that. That, I think, is an anti-libertarian position.
I can give you the proper philosophical justification for it if you want.
Here's the deal. If I steal your house and you have no proof that it's your house, and then we later determine at a later date, it doesn't magically become that you never owned the property and now you do own the property. It is only that you were able to determine with evidence the objective fact that was objectively true the entire time, which is that you did own the property. Right? Homesteaded property is owned unless abandoned. The arbitrary nature of abandonment is something that libertarianism hasn't quite solved. Like, what necessarily?
I disagree that hasn't solved. And this actually ties into why my answer is
maybe.
Right? Basically, my answer to this type of contention is that property rights are fundamentally communicative. Right? You are communicating to others that you own something, that you've embroidered something, that you are looking to avoid conflicts over this thing, right? You are using this thing, right? It's fundamentally communicative, right? This is, I go over this in my course, where you have every property border. I haven't listened
to it all yet, but you should definitely check it out.
Every property border.
Not you, I mean audience.
Yeah, no, I'll check it out. Don't worry about it. Every property border has to be objective, or as Hopper calls it, intersubjectively ascertainable. What this means is it has to pertain to existence as against the arbitrary content of your mind, right? And it has to be public. You have to be able to see this property border. The same applies across the board. So you have to be able to see that a certain thing is abandoned. You have to be able to see that a certain thing is a property. It has to be derivable. You have to be able to ascertain that a given property is owned by a given person. If it's impossible to ascertain this, then it's not really a property right. Because you can't avoid conflicts over its use.
I would love to have this conversation at a later date, because I don't know that it necessarily, the establishment of private property and when abandonment occurs seems like an overcomplication of this. We might be juggling too many things. At this point, we're literally just going over all of libertarian theory. I don't necessarily disagree with you on that. I disagree that that I disagree with the notion that there aren't gray areas that are difficult for us to ascertain and that we have a perfect answer for them that we can necessarily apply. Right? I think there are limit cases where we're not quite there. And I'm okay with that because I don't think any other philosophical system solves that. They just create a state and then they say an arbitrary thing 2 years or something. But nevertheless, the issue here is, what I'm trying to frame here is, my belief is that the state, right, has a whole bunch of policies together, right? That is their immigration policy, that includes their tax structure, that includes public funds, that includes all of these other things. And that tweaking the dial on one of those systems, right, that is inexorably linked to all of those other laws and systems, right, when we say open borders, what you describe as I support open borders is I support the abolition of the state, which is great, right? But the way that you use open borders definitionally is really just a word game. Or maybe we could say that other people are doing word games. But what you're really saying is I'm in favor of private borders. And that is my position as well. And the open borders position that is touted by the Prague, I almost said the bad word because I forgot you're on YouTube, by the Prags, I say it all the time on Rumble, by the Prags, by lefties, and even by neocon, corporatist, Republicans, etc. Right? This idea of what we're going to do is maintain the status quo and all of these other things. You say, well, philosophically, right? And I apologize for reframing everything, but it's something I need to do for my brain. Philosophically, the important distinction here is we'll set the private and we'll set all the inexorable link things aside. I think they're a crucial part of the argument. You disagree because you want to focus on the public property aspect. And that's fine. Philosophically, right? The state has stolen land or has unused. It is not unused land. It is stolen land, right? And the state has no right to forestall people from said stolen land. And so the idea that we should that we should arbitrarily enforce borders at our nation border is the same fundamental concept as whether or not someone may homestead or come into a park based on their citizenship status, right? The two are analogous. Coming across the Mexican border is basically the same, so long as you're not coming across someone's private property, but you're using like a checkpoint or, you know, some area of publicly owned land, etc. It's fun, no different than someone from out of town or someone from another country coming into a public park. Why should the state have a right to exclude people from a public park when it is indeed stolen land that they themselves do not own? My contention is that they must maintain control over that land as in trust until such a time that they can pay restitution because they are in possession of this land. And your contention seems to be, well, they don't actually own this land. This land is unowned. It is simply they're in possession of this land, but by utilizing force, and that the best thing for them to do would be to simply stop being involved on this land that doesn't belong to anybody. And so the debate seems to have come to this point where I am in the opinions that are laid out there. Is that a good reframing kind of our overall theme of the argument so far?
Yeah, and I would also say, I would ask you if you want to continue along this debate, because I need to really go to take a piss right now. So if there's more to be said, then I will, take a break and, come back. But if not, then we can stop it here. So I'd ask if...
Well, yeah, how about we just give a little bit of a closing kind of statement or whatever. I think I went first, or I don't think we really had opening statements. You want to go first or second? I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of gave you
gotta take a piss, so I mean...
Yeah, I'll go first. Then I'll leave you.
I was just trying to frame the conversation. I thought we would continue, but also
I'm fine.
And take a piss and stuff too.
I'm fine with you. I'm fine with continuing. It's just whether or not there is more to say. Because I don't want to just go in circles.
Yeah, I don't want to go in circles either. I think there's a lot for us to say to each other, but I think that conversation then becomes additional conversations about other interesting topics and how they play into this situation as opposed to the actual debate itself.
Yeah. But I do want to say one thing to you, first off, is show up to the Snack Tube Discord voice chat tomorrow. You're in there already. And, we talk every week about
a lot of Discords. I forgot.
we talk every week about the, content creation strategy. You'd be good there. Because your live streaming stuff. Anyway, back onto the debate stuff. We're enemies for now.
Frenemies. We'll be frenemies.
Frenemies, yes. My main point would definitely be that fundamentally this debate comes down to whether or not the state has a right to exclude people from entering who are outside the country to inside the country. I think domestic migration is fundamentally the exact same thing as international migration. These is simply an arbitrary distinction that the state makes between domestic and international. We do not trust the state to be the arbiter of law. They do not decree law. We are natural law theorists, right? So fundamentally, nobody has this right. Even in libertarian circles, who are the most reasonable discussion on this topic, it comes down to the homeless question, as Anglo-Libertarian calls it. Does anybody have the right to exclude this homeless person from homesteading this park? I say no, and therefore nobody has a right to exclude an immigrant from doing so. And with that, I guess I'll have my video out on this probably by Monday. It's not going to be too long.
Yeah.
And you can see my full, I guess, thesis on this. Then.
Oh yeah. Hell yeah. I'd love to check it out. Make sure you DM it to me. So what I would say, is, if you've read Hop Up, there's not a lot difference between my position and his position here. Right. What I believe is pretty simple, which is that, goods can move freely and should move freely, without the state interference. But the fundamental difference between free trade, for example, right, and all of these other positions, this idea of immigrants is that they can move themselves, right? They can migrate, they can aggress, and they can choose to not aggress. They're incentivized to come into this country via welfare systems, via the existence of public roads, via the existence of public schools, hospitals, temporary assistance for needy families, and of course, the lack of fair free trade in our country also incentivizes them to move here for higher wages and a better standard of living. Now, the problem is that they are not invited. The state creates these contradictions that have been laid out throughout this conversation. Over and over and over again, it is the state that has created these contradictions in property. And so the question is how do we resolve these contradictions? My opponent, Liquid Zulu, says, well, the state can just kind of do nothing and just laissez-faire and back off in these specific instances. But, and hopefully all of these other things that are tied to it, will fall away and collapse and crumble. And in the new kind of situation that'll be better. I think that it requires a consequential analysis because it is not a matter of whether or not we are looking at a fundamental right, as many people claim, because the right of immigration does not exist. It is the state that has created these arbitrary distinctions to begin with. The fundamental right is for the private property owner to exclude individuals from his property as he or she sees fit. And so what is occurring here is something that I think is a demonstrous consequences that do not lead in any way, shape, or form strategically towards what it is that we want, which is private borders. If we want a system of private borders, instead of supporting open borders, what we should support is a tactic of taking public property and liquidating said public property, which is, I believe, as the trustee of the state, their duty to do so that they can sell these things off and pay restitution for the crimes of the stolen property, move towards privatization of that property, and we should institute a sponsorship program where NGOs or individual family members, etc., can take anybody that wants to come in and invite them like a private property owner would do and take full responsibility for any crimes that they commit, any bills that they need to pay, etc., and be allowed to get rid of them unless someone else grabs that guardianship at a later date, until such a time that we can do away with this arbitrary distinction of foreigner and citizen and go to a system of total privatization of property. You can check me out on that fucking haircut, man. You can check me out on Rumble right now. I'm gonna hop out of here because it's not my normal streaming day. We normally stream Mondays, Thursdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, plus other random times. Fabian Liberty, check me out on YouTube. Check me out on Rumble. Check me out on Twitter. And of course, I'll be speaking with Benjamin Boyce, which is a fairly well-known Christian conservative, about argumentation ethics. I think he wants to talk about a little bit about libertarian philosophy, possible intersections between Christianity and libertarian philosophy, maybe possible contradictions, and kind of get his opinions and try and proselytize libertarianism to the best of my ability. I appreciate everybody that showed up. I think it was a fun conversation. I'm really glad. I know he just went to go piss, but I'm really glad that we were able to have this conversation with people that I think have a decent understanding of libertarian philosophy, as opposed to random people just screaming like, "Don't let in the immigrants because they take our taxes," or people saying like, "Let everybody in because it bad." So whatever position you're in, even if your position didn't change, I hope you at the very least learned why the other position believes what it is that they believe. I mean that to my audience and Zulu's audience. Yeah, have a good one. I'm gonna remove Zulu. Sorry if that makes your chat, Zulu, when you look back at this. Sorry if that makes it a little boring or whatever, but I appreciate it nevertheless. And cheerio. Oh, now it comes back right at the end. You came back right at the end. I was like, well, now I'm done my spiel. Like,
oh yeah, no, sorry. I really had to fucking take a piss. I was going to UTI or something.
Fucking drinking beer will do to you, man.
Yeah. And that's the one problem. Drinking beer makes debates a lot more fun, but it also makes them a lot shorter because I gotta take a break halfway through or something.
Or you go on Brittany's channel and start screaming. You start committing sluricide.
Yeah. That was very fun. But I think that video, it might still be up on one of those BitChute. Yeah, probably. It's probably still on BitChute
somewhere.
Yeah, they have a bunch of different shit. But yeah, no.
We should do this more often, man. We should do this more often. Like, I know we disagree here, and I know it got a little bit spirited, but like, I really appreciate your knowledge on this, and hopefully I'm not. Hopefully I'm now no longer a baby ANCAP, and I'm actually learning my shit.
You're
getting better.
You're definitely a lot more, knowledgeable than the vast majority of like ANCAP influencers. Like, I would definitely place you above the last username fella, who I watched one of his Twitch streams.
He's not ANCAP.
Is he not anymore? I thought he was.
He claimed ANCAP, but he's an ethical egoist. And so like he's like a Friedmanite in terms of the non-aggression principle from like a consequential analysis.
Yeah. That was like that was one of the main reasons why I did my David Friedman video, was because I watched the stream of him trying to defend ANCAP against like PF Jung. And I was just so pissed off by the arguments he was making. I was like, "Holy shit, this guy does not understand his shit."
It's not a bad argument, I think Friedmanites serve a role in some regard. I don't know how I feel about them. Part of me thinks, "Fuck you, you're not ANCAP. I want to gatekeep the living shit out of you because you poison and water down the philosophy," which is the main thing I'm attempting to do. And then the other part of me is like, kind of like, I just like recognizing my own journey as a socialist and recognizing that I found, oh my God, who's the bald philosopher that was a peaceful parent and got kicked out of New Zealand with Lawrence Southern?
Molyneux.
And got
Stefan Molyneux.
I discovered him when I was a socialist and was like, fuck this guy, he's a racist. And then years later I came back and like it really that was when I started to see the issues with classical liberalism and started to going further towards like actual libertarianism was Molyneux. And so I recognize that the Friedmanites play a certain role. And that role is philosophically, they speak the language of the left and open their mind to the potentiality that like following the non-aggression principle or certain things don't necessarily like it does a little bit of like they do some consequentialist deprogramming that a lot of like Marxists have them believe that like, capitalism is this great evil, etc. And it always leads to bad outcomes. And then like it's one barrier that breaks and hopefully they find real ANCAPs. So I don't know how I feel about them.
I think my like problem with like their general strategy is maybe I'm like, kind of a hard ass or something, but I think, I take Rand's view that the way you win is you push the entire philosophy. You push the philosophy of truth. You push, like, hardcore anarcho-capitalism. That is the only winning condition. And you don't get this by watering down the philosophy that you're trying to push. You're only going to essentially herd people over. Like, Lenin even discovered this, right? With his idea of the vanguard. Yeah. Like, you don't win by herding over retards who don't know what they're talking about. Maybe I'm not allowed to say about that, but you don't. I basically call these sheep people. You herd them over, and then they just get herded back over to some other ideology, and they had no hardline stances.
Yeah, like I think you see this. I think you see this most often with Hoppians that like say that they've read Democracy, the God That Failed, but they clearly never read Democracy, the God That Failed. And then they just become like far right monarchists, post-libs at a certain point. And it's like, I'm like glad you appreciated your short stay in libertarianism, but like, can you go ahead and fuck off claiming that you have any libertarian views or that you ever held them? Right. Like, I agree.
Like Kinsella calls these people way station libertarians because they just like, they're just passing through. And like, I think the problem isn't just that these people aren't libertarian. The problem is that if you spend your time convincing these people, there's an opportunity cost there. You could have spent that time convincing an actual, thinking person who will actually advance the ideology. Like, I think that's the main problem.
Kind of position, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I
think it probably is Rand. Like, I thought this before I was an objectivist, but like, it definitely seems to conform with what Rand is saying. Like, I think these people just, some people, they, if you're just herding people over, they're not actually forwarding the ideology at all. They're just there to say your slogans or whatever. That doesn't do anything,
So I'm 50-50 on this because I think you're mostly right. The problem is I also think of this in terms of like disaggregated ideologies and how when those things come together, they kind of formulate an ideology, right? And so you see this with the Long March on the institutions of the left, right? They all have little bits and pieces. The useful idiots have little bits and pieces that they do get and a bunch of wrong shit that they don't get. But when they get together in crowds or when they reach a certain critical mass in institutions, the ideology kind of runs on its own, despite the fact that the individual actors don't really fully represent or fully encapsulate or know the ideology, right? And it's in a very dangerous position. I don't know if the same works for libertarianism. I don't. And I have a feeling, and I'm leaning towards yours, that it probably doesn't. And yet, there's also something to be said with, if we look at any YouTube videos from right-wingers from 10 years ago, you're never going to hear them utter the word the state. You're going to hear them say, you know, the U.S. government, right? Or like the corporations and stuff. It's very clear that at some level there's spillover in both directions, where our language and some of our ideas and sloganeering, like you said, spills over into those places. But I wonder if we're too isolated and we're too gatekept and we're too strong in our philosophy, do we get to a position where, because we don't have those people that sit in between, people that are on the other end of paleo-libertarian, right, that have like a couple of libertarian ideas, kinda, but they're conservatives, they're tradcons or whatever, like that their audience doesn't funnel and find us. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I think it's a bit of a give and take, and I'm not sure that I want to fully denigrate people. At the same time, I do think it's important that people like you exist when somebody says something stupid and claims libertarianism, that they get attacked for it. And yet at the same time, like, for example, with this immigration debate, Josie, the redheaded libertarian, right? Like, I guess I just love burning bridges, and that's the worst fucking habit I have. But like, she's defending what is essentially my position, but she has no idea where she's getting that position from. I believe it's mostly just histrionics, right? Like,
yeah, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Definitely not at all. Right.
And she calls herself a libertarian. She's a paleo lib. You know,
she's
a
woman, so she gets like 1,000 fucking followers in a day.
Actually, in a day. I was about to say, I was like, she's got almost 500,000. Right. But you get what I'm saying, right? It's like, part of me is like, that person needs to be gatekept and they should never be able to call themselves a libertarian. And then the other part of me is like, is it good that someone has 500,000 followers that calls themselves a libertarian? People watch them a little bit and then they see you come in and be like, that's not the answer. Here's the video that actually has the answer. And those few people that you're talking about, those philosopher kings, if you will, end up finding you because that person exists. Yeah. And although they're poisoning the ideology as a whole, you discover the philosopher kings that never would have discovered you because of their existence.
I would say, on that note, I'm probably more on this issue again. I'm probably more radical than you, where I have doubts whether Dave Smith is an apt spokesperson for the libertarian movement, because he's very weak on a lot of issues. Like, he doesn't have the same passion that I see in, like, you know, random people in my Discord. They'll come up and they'll be, you know, saying the issues far greater than Dave Smith is. You know, maybe I'm just a stickler for the theory or something.
Good. He's pretty good on war. I'll give him that.
Yeah, I mean, that's an easy issue to be good on, you know.
No, I mean like in terms of his like philosophy and his communication. But here's the other thing too, is that like one of the things that I've noticed is with big creators and small creators is it appears to me that creators in general in the political and news space tend to be slightly smarter than their audience. And so what this does is, because people want to hear something that's just on the tip of their tongue that they can't quite put into words, and then the creator says it, and it makes both people feel smart, right? It makes them feel smart because they're like, that's what it was. And they learned something, but they had basically already figured it out themselves, right? This is why Jordan Peterson kind of talked about this when he was talking about like psychology and stuff. He's like, people say that like they're discovering things that they kind of knew all along, and that's why they're so passionate. That's what makes people really fall in love with the creator. And so when you have really, really, really big accounts with a lot of followers, kind of makes you think, if you appeal to that wide of an audience, and it's typical that your audience is only slightly dumber than you are, well, then how good are your, how at the limits of intellectual capacity are your ideas? There is an exception, which is that some people have an ability to communicate complicated ideas in a way that other people can understand them.
Yeah.
I think Tucker Carlson is an example of this. Tucker Carlson's a midwit, right? But he can communicate to people that are just straight up dumb and get them to get a lot that they wouldn't have gotten. He's a great communicator. And so I think Dave Smith is in a lot of ways one of those people. He's not quite at the pinnacle that I think, the leader of the philosophical vanguard needs be.
Yeah, he's not Hopper or something.
Right. But what he is able to do is he is able to take a basic idea where he gets one or two things wrong from Hoppe, right? And turn it into something that like normal people can understand, where you don't have to be autistic. And I think that might play an invaluable role while at the same time coming with some costs that we have to deal with.
I think the counterexample to this is Ayn Rand herself. Like, she was fantastically autistic. She was at least as autistic as me, if not more. Right? She would be fucking autistic.
That's my superpower. That's my superpower, is that I'm not autistic.
Ayn Rand was real autistic. And yet she is like a massive author. Like, she's really, really, really big. Like, she really pushed like on the similar level to like Ron Paul, even though she was like this complete autist, and she was completely, existence is this, we're going through these fucking philosophical arguments, 3-hour fucking monologue, Galt speech, we're going through the whole philosophy here, let's ship it, like, I think it can work, being this complete based autist. I think it can work.
Yeah, I'm not saying it can't work. I'm just saying, when I look at it, I don't know if I want to. Both positions seem like they throw the baby out with the bathwater sometimes, and I don't know what the right middle path is, if there even is one. Right? Maybe you're right, and we have to go full blown gatekeep, and we should just utterly, to the best of our ability, shit on everyone that calls himself a libertarian the moment they have a position that's slightly wrong. Maybe you're right. You know what I mean? And I do a fair bit of that myself. You know what I mean? I do. But at the same time, I don't know. You know what I mean? I just, Casimir said, Liquid Zulu got me to watch History of Philosophy by Peikoff. I'm greatly enjoying it, even with their slant. Dude, Leonard Peikoff is such a dick in that, in his shit. That's my biggest problem with objectivists. They're such assholes. Like, they never,
yeah.
They're all assholes.
I wanted to bring this up
none
earlier.
None of them are like nice about it. You know what I mean?
Like, because like I can't remember what the specific context was, but there was something where I wanted to bring up the cult of Ayn Rand, where basically, like, I want to do a video on this at some point, but I need to know more about the history of objectivism, like the movement,
right? To like better understand like Randians that are like, they're like, this was her position on abortion, therefore it's right. And it's like, dog, she was wrong on that. It's okay to be wrong sometimes. Yeah,
like basically the two fundamental factors which basically are completely linked, in my view, which have really truncated the objective movement, like almost destroyed it, are their adherence to IP, which is caused by their Randroidism, right? It's the Randroids, which are really, really, really destroying objectivism. Like, imagine if we were Rothbard droids, we would never advance beyond Rothbard. We would never, I would never have made my course. We would never be having this discussion. We'd just be saying, no, Rothbard thought this. It's like, okay. And then that's what Rothbard thought. And that's what the libertarian position is. It's a midwit's view of philosophy. And like, I just want to because I know you've had some objectivists in your, circle at some point. So I want to just appeal to those objectivists if they're ever listening. I want just...
They're not. I shit on one of them and this entire group left with him.
Okay. But I just want to appeal, if any objectivists are seeing this, Leonard Peikoff himself, in that History of Philosophy that Casimir mentions, he recognizes that Aristotle was not always an Aristotelian. Aristotle was sometimes a Platonist, because Aristotle was one of Plato's students, right? So you separate the philosophy from the philosopher who came up with that philosophy. It's a midwit's understanding. It's baby's first philosophy to say Aristotelianism, that's just whatever Aristotle felt, about whatever random issue. Rothbardianism, that's just whatever Rothbard thought about whatever random issue. Objectivism, that's just whatever Ayn Rand thought about any random issue. It's a midwit's idea of philosophy. It'd be the same as
if you thought that Stoicism was only what Marcus Aurelius thought. It's like, well, Seneca came before him, right? You know what I mean? And I forget the other dude whose name starts with an E, right? What is that? Epictetus.
Yeah, Epictetus.
Sorry, my roommate knows a lot more Stoicism than I did, but that is what it is. I definitely want to talk more in the future.
Zeno was the initial guy. I don't want to take up your time.
Did you see my tweet, though, before we go? Did you see my tweet about Morimoto Musashi?
No, I don't think so.
Because you were asking if anything good came from Eastern philosophy.
Yeah.
And if you're Musashi, a lot of his stuff, the Book of Five Rings, for example, has been really, really poorly translated and had a bunch of bullshit quotes added to it. And so the Westerner's understanding of Musashi is really bad. But there are a couple of copies that you can get where they're just direct English translations from kanji. And Musashi basically in the 1600s was explaining how religion and ideologies stop individuals from seeing the world for the way that the world is. And in many ways he had almost I don't want to say objectivist's position, but he had a grounded material. There's a lot of it that's really good. And he talks about the way is the void. And when he's talking about the void, he's talking about when you're in the zone, when you're playing sports and the world disappears. He's doing the same thing with with martial arts. And he's got a really good, actually, let me find this quote for you. Because I think before I go, fuck it. I'm going to go to Twitter and I'm going to find what it was.
I would say I would be interested in seeing that stuff, but to be clear with respect to that tweet, I was asking did they influence anything in modern philosophy? Which I doubt they did, because I think basically the conclusion I came to was that philosophy is just very, very, very difficult for humans to come up with. And that's why we only came to it once. We only came to basically Greece is where all of our philosophy is derived from, which is strange on a first look, but it may kind of make sense if you understand that philosophy is very, very difficult to come up with. But I would be very interested in seeing if we've had these ideas come up with.
I found the quote. So it's, what is called the spirit of the void is where there is nothing. It is not included in man's knowledge. With your spirit settled, accumulate practice day by day and hour by hour. Polish the twofold spirit, heart and mind, and sharpen the twofold gaze, perception and sight. When your spirit is not in the least clouded, when the clouds of bewilderment clear away, there is the true void. Until you realize the true way, whether in life or in common sense, you may think that things are correct and in order. However, if we look at things objectively, from the viewpoint of laws of the world, we see various doctrines departing from the true way. Know well this spirit, and with forthrightness as the foundation, and the true spirit as the way. Enact strategy broadly, correctly, and openly. Then you will come to think of things in a wide sense, and taking the void as the way, you will see the way as a void. In the void is virtue and no evil. Wisdom has existence. Principle has existence. The way has existence. Spirit is nothingness.
Yo, bro just really said existence exists at the end there.
Yeah, dude, in the 1600s.
That sounds, on a face kind of based. But it's very difficult to interpret these kind of primitive texts. It's very challenging to what the hell does he mean by this? Because they speak in a strange way.
So that's what Westerners did, and Westerners added all this other shit and then tried to reinterpret it instead of direct translations to make it make sense. And then but they added this Westerner obsession with Eastern stuff to it, and it actually isn't what it's completely away from when you read the direct translations, that's what you got from that. And it's like, if you read the original text and try and ascertain for yourself what it's meant, it's pretty fucking, it's pretty basic.
Yeah,
Fucking,
I mean, but like,
my roommate goes, too many mind.
Yeah.
Too many mind. It's true though.
Saying this, like, this has existence, it's like, holy shit, did fucking Rand write this or some shit? Like, you know, that's,
yeah, I mean, like, it really, it's like I said, it's not objectivism, but like, he has a lot of like philosophy that you're like, how that sounds similar.
You
like
squint
Sterner.
a little bit, like, hold on a little bit here.
Yeah, you should check it out. I mean, it's just as an interesting read, not as anything else. But I'm going to get out of here. I appreciate the debate.
Yeah,
I'm glad that we can stay frenemies.
We will forever be frenemies.
There you go. I respect your positions, even when I think that, you know, when I disagree with them, because I know that they're not just made up bullshit.
Like, I think that's true for both of us. Like, neither of us just, like, you know, stumbled into our positions. We both have done the reading. We have both done our research. We've both looked into the philosophy quite deeply, you know. Like, this is not just, you know, if I was speaking to some random who, you know, has 50,000 followers on Twitter and calls himself Liberty Babe or whatever, you know, and has tits as their profile picture, I'd be thinking, you know, this person does not understand the philosophy. You know, Scott, he understands the philosophy. So, you know, if you're interested in Twitch, genuinely, Fabian Liberty on Twitch, they understand.
No, I'm not. I might not be on Twitch.
Or are you going over to Rumble?
So
Rumble.
I've been on Rumble for a while. The true test is Wednesday, because Wednesday I'll be talking to Benjamin Boyce, and he wants to talk about argumentation ethics and libertarian philosophy with me. And so wish me luck, because I'm going to try and grab some of that giant Christian conservative audience over to at least whichever ones are like, this sounds interesting, I want to learn more. So hopefully on that regard. But the thing is that like Twitch has censored us to such a degree, it's insane, that like I had Chloe Cole on my show, right? And I couldn't break 30 viewers, which was lower than my average. Now I understand that Twitch has a left-wing bent. I understand that politics isn't the most popular thing on Twitch. But there's something weird about having the most famous D-trans person in the world and getting worse numbers than usual, and then having people being like, I couldn't find your channel even when I searched for it. And it's like, and I've had that experience a couple times with like really good interviews where it's like, this obviously should garner some attention. And yeah.
Well, like, I would
just leave it at that.
I would genuinely be interested, because like, I feel like you are very well versed in the Twitch style, I will say, of live streaming, because like there's different Twitch style and YouTube style of live streaming. Like, you know, YouTube style live streaming, you have some concise thing. You have like, you know, I'm doing this thing and it's like, you know, urgent, we gotta do this thing. Whereas Twitch, it's like, you know, we're just hanging out for like, you know, half the day or something. I think you were very, very good at that Twitch style of YouTubing or streaming, sorry. And like, you know, if any of you are interested in like that live stream type content, then go over to Fabian Liberty, wherever he is.
What's funny is that I've transitioned a little bit more to a more YouTube style in that regard, because that's
my
kind of what my audience demanded.
I'm so good.
Yeah, I mean, what's my audience kind of demanded, like more, I won't say concise streams, but more dedicated streams towards a topic. Never, and it's where I end up doing more research for the stream. It's like, you know, etc. But and people don't realize how much prep work goes into a live stream. You know, a lot of times people are like, oh, you know, you were on stream for 4 hours and you were just hanging out and talking and sharing news articles. It's like, no, bitch, I found those news articles. I read those news articles. I found other information to talk about it. I wrote jokes on a fucking piece of paper, you know, to like talk about
this. This is what I was asking
with
you the other day. Like, I was like, how the fuck does a live stream even work? Like, how the fuck do you like even talk for like fucking 4 hours? Like, I don't know how to just randomly go live and be like, okay, here's what we're doing, just on my own. Like, I don't know how to do that, but you know how to do that. So you're like, you know, that's why I want you into the Snack Tube group. I want to indoctrinate you. It's normally at 2000 hours British time. So
4 p.m. Or did you say 20?
20, yeah. So that would be 3 p.m. Eastern time.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry. 1500. All right.
Sorry,
I apologize. 1500.
I just like my 24-hour times. Yeah. I'll at you in the, like when it's coming up or something.
Liquid. As a streamer that regularly debates and talks to other people, I'm in about 60 different Discords. All right. Like, actually, that's lowballing it. I have like 30 things on the side, and like 20 of them are folders that I group by like, these are like the TradCon places. These are the debate places. Like, I'm probably in about just under 100 Discords. You adding me and adding another notification is not going to get seen at all.
I'll DM you then. I'll DM you. I'll be like, okay, here's
I have like 3,000 notifications.
Roll on your Discord list. Go to this Discord. Here's the event. Like no, that's the thing. I have the event link, so you can just click on the event, and it'll just take you to the VC. So we'll do that. We'll do it.
Oh yeah, send it to me, and I'll be there tomorrow if I don't forget.
Yeah.
Oh fuck! I have to go. Hold on. Actually, I have something I have to do, so I probably won't be there. I'm sorry.
Oh shit! I'll send it to you anyway.
Cut my mom's grass. I just forgot. I got to go cut her grass.
If you end up finishing at some point, then come on in. We'll
I will. If I have time. All right, brother. See you around.
Peace.